So you lived in Idaho for, was it about 9 years before everything got crazy?
Yes, 9 years before everything, changed.
So it was everything was beautiful and good and hard, but perfect at the same time. And then can you kind of walk us through how did things start to change? Like what led to what ultimately became known as Ruby Ridge?
Yeah, so I believe there were a chain of just different events that started happening. And, being a kid at the time, I don't necessarily, have a great understanding of each thing that happened. But I know there were people my parents allowed to build a home and live on our property. And they got into some sort of scrap with them. And they ended up, someone ended up sending in a letter to, I don't even know where they sent the letter to or who they sent it to, but it was threatening the president at the time, and they signed my dad's name to it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what got them kind of on the radar to begin with. I don't know for sure, but that was just one of, the things that happened. And then my parents were, it's funny because I've seen a couple of your podcasts and you talk about, you filtering, the things that you say and like editing certain things. And I think back to my parents and they didn't have filters mm-hmm. and they didn't self-edit. I mean, they spoke what they thought and what they felt. And if you didn't like it, like that was on you. That wasn't on them, Mm-hmm. And so the different friends that they made, in North Idaho, it gathers a lot of different personalities from a lot of different places. And there's some people that moved, that were living, that were hiding from things. And there were some people that were there just to be left alone. And mm-hmm. It was interesting because some of the people that befriended my parents actually ended up being snitches for the government. Mm-hmm. So it's my understanding that, someone gets into trouble with the law, and you might know more about this, having a law enforcement background than I do, but someone would get in trouble with the law and then they would cut a deal and they would say, okay, well, if you bring us information on this certain person, then, your punishment will be less or whatever. That's my understanding of it, not having that background, and you can jump in if
that's essentially the case. You're talking like paid informants mm-hmm. To where you now have an incentive to do some bidding for the government.
Yeah. And to my thought process is this person already a criminal? Mm-hmm. And so you're basically paying a criminal to gather information on someone. Very
less than ideal, imperfect system for sure.
Right. And especially when you have money involved.
Yes.
Because then what are they making stuff up to get paid more? Mm-hmm. Things like that. These are just things I think about now. Mm-hmm. But some of the people that had befriended them, we found out later, were informants. And so we didn't know it at the time, obviously, or we wouldn't have been friends with them. Mm-hmm. When we did find out or did start to suspect, like the amount of betrayal you can imagine my parents felt was very deep mm-hmm. and it was very hurtful, just incredibly hurtful. It sort of pulls the rug out from under you mm-hmm. And you start to question everything and everyone. But this particular person invited my dad one year to go check out a group. And it happened to be Aryan Nations in Hayden Lake in North Idaho. And my dad was not a joiner of anything after he and my mom had been hurt by a church. I mean, he was just done with joining anything. He was done with churches. He was done with pastors. And they had set themselves up as a church. And I remember him never wanting to go inside the actual building of the church because he was just done with that, mm-hmm. But my dad was also very curious, very opinionated. He liked to search things out for himself. And he's like, sure, I'll go with you. So he went, and I believe that informant ended up introducing him to another one. And that one was the one that talked him into cutting off or sawing off shotguns.
Wow. So oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
So from my understanding, had he gotten a permit, it would have been legal. Is that true, or is that misinformation?
I believe it was a $200 permit that it would have been legal.
Wow.
But when this happened, so for your listeners that aren't from a remote mountainous area 30 years ago, a type of place where you live and you're snowed in for months at a time. You have to either walk out a couple miles to get to your vehicle to get anywhere, or you're rich enough to have a snowmobile, or my parents weren't. They were very I would say poor. I would say I grew up poor, but we felt rich. We never felt like we were poor. But this informant caught my dad at a very vulnerable time for him, in that he needed money, and he needed money to put groceries on the table. Like he needed to buy bread and butter and cheese or whatever. So this informant offered to pay him more than what the actual shotguns were worth to take a hacksaw to him and cut them off for him. And so my dad agreed to do it, and he took full responsibility for doing that. He's never denied it. He's never, he said, yeah, I did it. But he did it for the wrong person, obviously, and he shouldn't have done it, because that's what basically started the entire snowball. That ended up, being so destructive.
So to fast forward a little bit, he gets brought up on criminal charges for sawing off the barrel of the shotgun. And he eventually reaches a point. Was there a miscommunication somewhere along the line? Because he had actually leveraged your home and your property as a part of his bail. Is that correct?
Yes. So what happened, so my parents were headed to town one day, and this is so North Idaho. They saw a broken down vehicle on the side of the road, and they stopped to help the person in the broken down vehicle. And the agents knew my parents had that type of a personality and a heart that they would stop and help. And they were actually hiding in the truck, and they ended up arresting my dad and my mom. They threw my mom in the snow, and they confiscated her pistol, and they took my dad to jail. And the information that he was given was that if he loses his bond, and the bond was our home, I believe it was a $10,000 bond. And if he lost his case, he would lose his bond. So he's like, how could I not lose my case? Like, you literally entrapped me. You have all the evidence, So he came home and, shared with us, if I lose the case, we lose our home, we're homeless. And that was some really hard information, to learn. And we found out later that was wrong. So it wasn't even the correct information.
Because I had heard that, and I was a little confused as to how that was the case. So that explains a lot. So eventually he now fails to appear for his court date, correct?
Yes. And that was another mistake so I believe his court date was February 20th, and they sent him a letter saying it was a month later.
Right.
So when he didn't show up to court, so the media got a hold of it. The U.S. Marshals said they were going to, take him out and all this stuff. And we were hearing this stuff on the radio.
Oh my gosh.
And it was coming up, through our friends and things like that. And so when he missed his court date, it was almost like, so it wasn't like, oh, there was a mistake made here. It was like, okay, we're going to go take him out because he missed his court date, is my understanding of it, being, a kid and kind of watching. It's frustrating because even now, the media likes to carry this narrative that he just chose not to go to court. But he never got the chance to make the choice.
That was my next question, because these are such massive details within the backstory of Ruby Ridge, as so many of us have come to know it. And it feels like they are glossed over or left out entirely. Is that a tremendous, I'd imagine it's a tremendous source of frustration for you?
It's very frustrating. It is very frustrating. There's certain, like you said, there's massive details that are minimized.
Right.
And it's easy then, we were talking about this, how it's easy to make someone disposable once you completely disagree with who they are as a person and what they've done. And then you just throw them out with the trash.
Yeah.
And I think that's so easy to do when we read, a column in a newspaper, which that's really all we had back then, or hear something on the news, or we didn't have social media back then.
Right.
We had newspapers and we had, the nightly news, and the narrative that was picked up and just got, of course, he was also a white supremacist. He was a white supremacist that chose not to go to court, and, all of these buzzwords that are labels, and they're very damaging. Very damaging.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful with labels, I think.
Yeah,
Agreed.
for sure. Especially like had it been portrayed as this is a family that lives in the mountains and, 4 little kids and a mom and dad, and they homeschool and they have a horse and they garden, and it would have been perceived so differently
Yes.
by the public. But they created this FBI profile on even your mom and made it sound like she was this religious fanatic that would kill her own children rather than come down the mountain, is what I read on that.
That is so heartbreaking to me that has become her story, that's become the memory of her that everyone collectively knows. And the letters that she wrote out of frustration. I look back on those letters and I read Facebook posts to political leaders by people that you can have thousands of them that are worse than the letters that my mom wrote out of hurt, frustration, not knowing where to turn, who to talk to, how to get out of this thing that was really starting to gain traction. She did not know what to do. And she was angry as well, not only with, having friends that weren't friends, but being entrapped, my dad being entrapped. And then, all of a sudden here he's this wild animal up in the woods and they're going to go take him out. I mean, she was at her wit's end, and I do not blame her.
Yeah.
But that was not her whole story.
Right.
That was one tiny blip in the timeline of her life.
Right.
And it was like one of the lowest in her life.
Yeah.
She was an amazing woman.
Who was your mom? Can you speak to the type of person your mother was?
Oh my gosh. Sorry.
No. They're there for.
Thank you. She was beautiful in so many ways. You remind me of her a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Just because you have to have some kind of internal grit and like some kind of internal just love for your family to like go out to North Idaho and live however you got to live and get it done because you see a better life for your family. And she did. And she loved her family like so deeply. She was willing to do what she needed to do to provide the best kind of life for them that she thought would be the best for them. And she was very educated. She loved her dad. She was a perfectionist in a lot of ways. She could make something out of nothing. She could stretch a nickel into a dime. She didn't complain. She went without so that we could have. I think it describes moms like all over the country in a lot of ways, just you want what's best for your family and you do the best you can with the knowledge that you have at the time to make that happen. And that's who she was.
Yeah.
And I hope to be half the woman that she was,
Just your testament of your mom speaks to who she is. The fact that you can sit here 30 years later and speak so highly of her just shares who she is with everybody. And I think that's such an amazing thing because I do feel like your mom also got kind of lost in the retelling of the story. And you never heard much about her. Just a few little blips, like you said, and you can corner any mama bear into a corner, and if you're going to get a different mama bear than she is with her cubs.
Yeah. So. Yeah. She was so strong. I mean, my dad delivered my little sister on top of the mountain, and for her to make that decision, that's huge. That was her 4th child. She was in her 40s. I mean, I there's no way I could do that. I mean, I look back at that and I'm like, whoa. That's some grit.
It must have been scary.
Yeah, I think it was. I think in a lot of ways, I mean, there's probably a lot of things that scared her all the time. I know being a mom myself, I mean, I have fears all the time about my child. It keeps me on my knees. And I can only imagine. I wish I could talk to her and just pick her brain now, being in my 40s.
Yeah. I can't imagine as a mom how consumed she must have been. And and probably angry for what had happened to her family and her children, and the fact that your life was so altered and changed. It seems so blown out of proportion that you could, something like this could become so serious and just even be on the news at all when the crime committed, which he was never, it was never even, he never even got to go to trial on it. All he had to do was get a permit. So how serious is this offense? Anyway, why the marshals? Why did this become such a big deal? It seems so unnecessary.
Yes. I have pondered that my entire, life since it has happened. And one of the conclusions I came to, and maybe you'll be able to speak to this, Jeremy, is, like I said, my dad didn't have a filter. And he was an ex-Green Beret. He had a lot of pride. He had a lot of, I'm my own man type personality, right? So they approached him after they had, convinced him to saw off the shotguns, and they had him, and they said, okay, Randy, well, we have you now, on tape doing this, and you're busted, basically. We would like you to become an informant for us for Aryan Nations. Because my dad was very likable. People would listen to him. He had a sense of humor. He was a likable guy. And I think, they sort of wanted him for that purpose. But my dad, at that point, I mean, if you can imagine his sense of justice and righteousness, and are you kidding me? Like, you trapped me and now you want me to work for you? He was just not about it. Mm-hmm. And so I can't imagine the conversation I can't imagine on my dad's side, but I can't imagine the conversation between my dad and this ATF agent. Well, Weaver, we want you to come work for us now. How that went, I know my dad probably gave him the what for and was like, you're a joke. Mm-hmm. That would be my biggest, knowing my dad and his fiery sort of spirit. You may have more insight in how law enforcement works. I know
I've never
battle
directly
of egos.
For sure. And I think it definitely speaks to your father's character. And I think it's so important to, kind of like you just said, to place ourselves in his shoes in that moment. Because quite honestly, with my background, I don't know how I would respond in a situation like that. But I will tell you that I do completely understand where he was coming from. Mm-hmm. You feel that sense of betrayal in the moment, and then in the next, you feel as though you are being pressured into making a decision that goes against your very being. Mm-hmm. And so I completely understand that. And like I said, I was a patrol officer, and I wasn't responsible for flipping CIs or doing anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I completely understand where your dad was coming from in that situation.
Yeah. I kind of wonder what the agent, if he had an ego, and if he had his own pride, and he had his own sort of, well, I'm the law and you're going to do what we tell you to do or else, kind of, and when those two personalities clash, it's not good.
Looking back at it, I think the entire ordeal, if I can refer to it as such, stems in large part to the fact that so many people allowed their pride and ego mm-hmm. to override their more rational brain.
Yeah.
Because kind of like Melissa just pointed out, the response that ensued once we had what was chalked up as being a barricaded subject, essentially, with your father and your family staying put there on your property, it did not match the level of severity in the crimes that he was being charged with. Not even in the same remote ballpark by any means, and which is so baffling looking back at it. So that being the case, one of the questions that I had for you, being given my background in law enforcement, mm-hmm. and come to find out your son is now working in law enforcement, is kind of what your general outlook on law enforcement as a whole is. I mean, we came in here and we walked by the wall full of patches, and I have my thin blue line flag hanging up here on the wall. Given what it is that you've endured and lived through and overcome in your life, how do you view modern day law enforcement?
Oh my gosh, they have a tough job, an incredibly tough job, and obviously a servant's job. And it's very close to my heart. I don't hold anything against law enforcement as a whole, and I don't think we can do that in any capacity with sort of any group. At the end of the day, I believe we're all individuals making choices, and we can make good choices or we can make bad choices. It doesn't matter what your profession is. And so I've met, in my book signings just across this nation, I've met men in law enforcement that are just they're literally brought to tears at my book table over what happened. And I respect them highly for the job that they have to do, and they're putting their lives on the line for us every single day. And I don't think a lot of the time they get enough credit. I do feel there are people in law enforcement that shouldn't be in law enforcement. I don't know if they're suited for it, and that's a whole other conversation. But, at the end of the day, when we lay our heads down at night on the pillow, we're all individuals making choices. And some of us make good choices and some of us make bad choices.
Yeah.
And like you said, the pride and the ego thing, those can fuel choices. Fear can fuel choices. I'm on my knees for my, just for my own kid, because I want to make sure that he's making the best choices and he's protected. It's a scary world out there. And I think having, a humble spirit can go a long way. I also know you bump up against some really nasty things and you have to be ready for them, so I know there was a group that was called to Ruby Ridge. I think they were from Colorado, and they just turned around and walked off and said, we don't want any part of this. And at the end of the day, people like that are my heroes because they made a choice and they made a good choice. And so when we are confronted with a choice that, hey, you're going to do this or you're going to lose your job if you don't, are we going to make the choice that we're willing to lose our job to do the right thing? And the waters get muddy. They really do. And people at the end of the day make the choices that are best for them. But I support our law enforcement. I don't hold what happened to me up there against law enforcement at all. There's too many good ones out there to throw the whole group in the garbage. And it's like that with anything.
I think that's a really admirable, incredible stance. I think a lot of people would harbor so much anger that it would just blanket an entire group. So I think that's really incredible that you can do that. So let's go back a little bit. So he misses the court date. Now he doesn't know what to do. So your mom and him decide, we're just going to stay up here and try till somebody helps us, till we get this figured out. So what does that look like, and how long did that go on?
Yeah, that was a heavy conversation. I vaguely remember it happening one night, and it was like, well, now what? And that ended up going on about 18 months. Unbeknownst to us, they had started surveillance like on our property and on our cabin and things like that. And we had people supporting us that would bring us, groceries. And there were some people that were just absolutely amazing in that time for us. I remember one family brought my mom like donuts and flowers on Mother's Day. And we ended up reconnecting with them years later, which was amazing because they lived in Montana, and we ran into them at a fair.
Oh my
gosh.
I was showing my horse, and we ran into them, and we reconnected that relationship, and it's been a blessing. And then there were some that were coming up that my parents didn't know if they were more paid informants. So it was wild. It was weird because you didn't know if the people helping you were really not helping you. So it was unnerving, and then being a teenager and not being able to go anywhere or leave the mountain, I was just coming into being 16 and, not really knowing what was going to happen, trying not to just worry about it and thinking it would get figured out, know. And when 18 months goes by, that's a long time to sort of get numb to it, and just daily life has to happen.
Yeah.
And when you live that way, your job is just surviving. I mean, from hauling water to doing the laundry, hanging it on the line and baking and, chopping wood and all that stuff. Just living is a full-time job. And so you get just caught up in the daily life. And then my mom was pregnant with my little sister as well. So she, had that to sort of look forward to. And she was making baby clothes and bibs and quilts and all of that stuff. So in a lot of ways, it was just life as usual. We just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So
Did you have any idea you were being watched in that time?
no, that was the weird part. And then, some members of the family went for a hike and found some equipment at one point. And then we were told, oh, they might be keeping an eye on us here, you know? So that was an interesting discovery, but that was like way into, the 18 months, I think just looking back on it. And again, my memory is horrible because I think as a self-defense mechanism, my brain like blocked out so many things. And so when I sat down to write my book, like literally I would have to sit down at the computer and pray before I started. And then the things that the Lord brought to my mind, it was just amazing. It was like, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't thought about that in so long.
Yeah.
So he kind of God helped me write the book and brought a lot of things to memory.
And you've said many times that your brother Sam, he was 2 years younger than you.
Yes.
Was your best friend growing up.
Yes, without a doubt.
So you guys really relied on one another probably for entertainment and everything else in that 18 months.
Yes. We relied on each other all the time. I was his big protective sister, and he was just he was a brilliant kid. I mean, I think about what he would be doing now if he were still here, and, all these TikTok brains and YouTube, they're creating all kinds of crazy things. And I see him, he's had a very mechanical brain, and he used to read encyclopedias for fun. And then he would quote them, and I would argue with him about stuff, and then he'd show me where he was right. And of course I would get mad at him for that, but he was always right. And he would fix things for me, and we would build forts together, and we would fish, and we would hike, and we were just inseparable.
Yeah.
We just did everything together. And, we fought as hard as we played sometimes.
Of course.
Yeah. He was my best bud.
Yeah. All right. So here's kind of the harder part of the story. So take us to that August morning when things just all of a sudden changed.
Yeah. It was a normal morning. There wasn't anything odd that I can remember about it at all. It was August, and everything was dry, and the grasshoppers are thumping in the dust, and it was just a typical morning until the dogs started barking. And I was in the house. I remember the dogs started making commotion, and then I just kind of wandered outside, and Sam and Dad and Kevin took off sort of after the dogs, and they decided they were going to, follow Stryker, because Stryker, I believe he was like a yellow lab and what do they call those livestock guardian dogs? The big white ones, the Pyrenees.
Pyrenees.
I think he was half and half. And so he was huge. He looked like a lab, but he was huge. And he was really alarming. He was really sounding the alarm. So they believed he was onto some kind of a large animal. Mm-hmm. He was alarming like it was a bear or a moose or something like that. And so they're like, well, we're going to follow Stryker and see if we can, figure out what he's after. And so I just thought, okay, and I didn't go. I was like, yeah, we'll let them do that. It was just kind of a lazy morning. And until I heard gunshots and yelling, and I didn't know what was going on, but I knew there should not have been gunshots. Like, that was abnormal. That was not, and it was summertime, so they wouldn't have been shooting any kind of an animal. Mm-hmm. It was way out of character. And my immediate thought was Stryker cornered a bear, and they're firing to scare the bear or break the dog and the bear or something up, because that's what my dad had taught us to do as kids. We carried, because we would go out we'd get lost for hours, and there were no cell phones. There was no way to get a hold of mom and dad. If we ran into a bear, like, we had to take care of it, or we ran into a cat, like, we were on our own as kids, and we were free range, as they call it. We were wild, and so my dad taught us to shoot very young, and, we carried guns with us when we were out in the woods because it was dangerous. But the first thing you would do is fire in the air if you ever ran into an animal that was challenging you. You wouldn't try to shoot the animal, you would try to scare it off, which is safer anyway, because if you wound a bear, you're in for it.
Yeah.
And we knew that.
Yep.
So scaring an animal is what immediately came to my mind, but that wasn't what happened. My dad ended up coming home first, and I had gone out to the rock that overlooked the driveway, and I was just waiting for him to come back, and he came home first, and, I was like, where's Kevin? Where's Sam? And my dad, he was very, shaken, and he's like, I don't know. I hollered at him. He said, I think they're coming in behind me. He said, I ran into someone in camouflage, and he's like, my shotgun jammed. He was trying to fire in the air. Apparently what had happened is they had split up. So there was a logging trail, and Sam and Kevin had gone one way and Dad had gone another, and they were going to try and meet up in the middle at whatever Stryker was chasing. And they ended up running into U.S. Marshals instead. So it wasn't an animal. So when my dad, separate from Sam and Kevin, had run into this person in camouflage, this person in camouflage had screamed out, "Freeze, Randy." And my dad basically said, "F you." But he knew Sam and Kevin and the dog were down this road on the other side. And he started screaming at them, "Sam, Kevin, get home, get home." And he said, I pulled my gun out to fire in the air because they would know to head home if they heard gunfire. He said, but my shotgun jammed. Well, there was other gunfire then that had started to take place, and he didn't know it at the time, what actually, was happening. But Sam had called out, "I'm coming, Dad." And so Dad believed that Sam was on his way home. And Kevin came walking back up the driveway a little bit later, and I could tell he was crying and his hat was gone. And it was just that's when the world just ended for me, because he said, "Sam's gone." And I was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And I just broke down bawling. I couldn't wrap my brain around what he was saying. And he said, yes. He's like, his face was turning blue. And I knew at that moment, I didn't want to believe it, but I knew just by how terrible Kevin looked that it was just, that was sort of, I think a part of me had died that day. I know a part of me died that day with Sam. So, yeah, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to think about. It's, what we found out later is that Stryker had been barking at men in camouflage in the woods, and the story was that Kevin had come back and shared with us is that Sam he was following Stryker down the path, and the marshals shot Stryker in front of him. And my dad had heard Stryker yelp, but they didn't kill him. They shot him sort of in the spine or in the back. And so Stryker yelped, and he didn't die right away. And so my brother screamed out at them, "You shot my dog." And then from what I understand, he fired shots into the woods. Well, they were hiding in camouflage, full camouflage in the woods. And my brother was on the logging trail with the dog. So Sam and the dog were out in the open, and they were in the woods. And Sam only probably had an idea of what direction. So then he turned around and started running up the logging path, and they shot him in the back of the arm. And then they shot him in the back. And he was 14 years old, and he was not a big 14-year-old. He was a little kid. He hated the fact that he was such a small little kid at 14. That was a big embarrassment for him. But There's no way he could have mistaken him for anything but a kid. And he was running away when they killed him. So it's really hard. It's really hard for me to think about even to this day. And I've been telling this story, you know, over and over again, years. But being just an adult, when I separate myself from the story, and like you said, you know, the punishment not fitting the crime, I think about that a lot. And I think about, you know, here's this 14-year-old little kid shot in the back. And what was it over? Well, how did this get started? Right? It wasn't anything that should have escalated like that. So they had said they were up there they were doing surveillance. But I do believe one of the agents, their job was to eliminate the dog that day because our dogs were our warning system. And so I don't know. There's another choice for you. Had they made the choice not to eliminate the dog that day, would Sam still be here? If they would have pulled back and said, now's not the time to do this, you know, we've been compromised or whatever, I don't know. I've never talked to any of them personally. So it's, for me, you know, it's just things that I think about now.
Completely understandable.
Yeah.
So now at this point, we have an initial firefight. There's a gun battle there on the property. You have your brother who passes away during this incident. You now have a federal law enforcement officer who also passed away during the same gun battle, which ratchets the level of seriousness up tremendously.
Yes.
So there's a now secondary response, an overwhelming response. Am I accurate in describing it that way?
Yes.
Because every single photograph and video clip that I've seen in the meadow section beneath the cabin literally ends up looking like a scene from Vietnam. Is that something that you were aware of at the time? Did you have a visible line of sight to all of that staging area down below?
We didn't have a visual line of sight, but we could hear things moving into the valley.
And we're talking armored vehicles, tanks,
Yes.
helicopters.
Yes. One thing I would like to bring up about the U.S. Marshal that passed away, and that's heartbreaking to me as well, is that it was never proven who actually killed him,
Right.
which is also heartbreaking to me in a lot of ways, because I guess there's not a lot of closure there either. During the trial, Jerry Spence and it was actually during the trial, they were looking at a backpack that he had been wearing, and they found a bullet in his backpack. I was told that the submachine gun that they'd been given to take out the dog was silenced. And so, you know, you can speculate all day long. I feel like if it would have been on the side of my family, they would have proved who actually did kill him. And
Yes.
had it been Kevin, I don't think Kevin would be a free man right now. Had it been my brother, I think they would have fully pinned it on my brother.
Yeah.
But there's still I don't have closure on that part.
So friendly fire is a completely plausible theory.
I mean,
In
you
this
said
case.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, you know, and it's sad to me, you know, all the way around. I've had, you know, a family member reach out to me of his, and I will never share that person's name just because it's such a private and personal journey. I would never want to put them on the spot. But after I came out with being able to forgive, they reached out to me, and you know, my heart breaks for them too, because there's loss on both sides. And at the end of the day, we were talking about this, we have a lot more things in common than we do have differences. And death of a family member, like, it's death of a family member. You know, when you go through that, it's awful, you know? So I want to put that out there, because there's human, they're on both sides. And so
I appreciate it. And it's another one of those very significant details that kind of gets glossed over
it does.
in the retelling of the story.
Yes.
Right. All they say is, well, he fired 2 rounds, that Sam fired 2 rounds, and then a marshal ended up dead. But they never once have said that it was Sam that killed him, and never once have said that it was Kevin that killed him. So I always thought that was very suspicious as well. Like, why didn't they determine who did? And why has that just been
Right.
And the state of Idaho brought charges against Kevin in later years and never, so yeah, it's very, like, there's a lot of things surrounding it that haven't been necessarily put to rest.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, they shot Sam in the back. They obviously saw him fall. Why was that not reported? How? Because they keep saying, well, we didn't know that Sam was dead until we found his body in the tool shed. How not?
Yeah, I think so. There were different, and this goes back to what you were saying about the meadow and all of the AP armored personnel carriers and the helicopters and the army tents and everything. We could hear everything moving into the valley, and at this point, other agencies got involved. So you not only had now U.S. Marshals, you had ATF, you had FBI, you had I'm sure they were briefing local law enforcement, which local law enforcement, had the sheriff walked up and knocked on the door and said, Randy, let's sit down and have a conversation on how we can end this. I don't think we would be sitting here today having this conversation. I do think my dad was amicable enough, someone with enough guts to sit down and say, there's one of my local people that they would have been able to find a better route to take.
Which eventually is what occurred. Not with the sheriff, but with Bo.
With Bo, yeah. But that was after everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's another great point. I mean, a third-party negotiator is key in these situations, in standoff type. I mean, I can't reiterate that enough. A third-party negotiator, because you're just too heated. These two sides are too heated. They can't talk to each other. You can't communicate. I mean, forget it.
Agreed.
But someone to come in that has a level head and a clear head and can speak with, some compassion and like understanding of what both sides are going through.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. But with these other agencies getting involved, I don't think they were communicating with each other the way they should have been.
Okay.
And why didn't they say,
Yeah.
who shot him in the back twice? Like they shot the back of his little arm. My dad said they blew his elbow off. Like they shot him in the elbow and then they shot him in the back, and he was in the open. So if you think about some of the thickest North Idaho woods, to the point it's like old growth cedars and it's dark, and then you have a logging trail, and that's the only open point. And he's in the middle of the logging trail and they're in the old growth in the dark woods. Who's the most visible in that situation? Right. And who shooting at who is able to see what they're shooting at? I mean, those are just my questions, but I don't know why they, I mean, somebody had to have known.
Right.
But then they also let Stryker just lay there, and they drove over him with vehicles. Like Stryker, he just was left laying in the middle of the road from what I've been told, and they just drove over his body, There's a lot of details that I have carried for many, many years that I haven't necessarily shared, just because they are so heavy and it's such an inflammatory story. My heart has never been to inflame people to the point of them, doing something stupid because they're angry, because they can ruin their life over a dumb decision just out of emotion. And I've felt a responsibility for this story for so many years to make sure that, it's told, but not in a way that's going to cause anyone to be inflamed.
Yeah.
It's just the story itself does that.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the things and I don't know why they're coming out right now, honestly. Maybe because you guys are so easy to talk to.
Well, we appreciate you being here and being willing to tell this story. Kind of like I told you outside, I feel like it's so important that your story be told and be heard, because it's unfathomable to most of us, and the bravery that you exude in retelling this story is so admirable, and I find it so incredibly inspirational. So, not that we're done or wrapped up here, but I want to thank you once again for being willing to sit here and to tell this story.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I mean, for a long time, I felt like I didn't have a voice, and just hearing that is very healing. So I really appreciate that. I feel like I've struggled upstream for a lot of years. And then social media came along and it's like, here's your voice. But it was just, I'm like, do I want it now?
Yeah.
Do I want to have the voice now? Because there's a lot of voices out there and there's a lot of voices saying a lot of things. And it's, do I want to add to that or not?
Right.
But I really appreciate that. It means a lot. And the reason I share and the reason I've been sharing for all these years is so it doesn't happen again. We can't let it happen again.
Yeah.
It's too terrible. And the people that I've met over the years that went through it with us, like they went through it with us on TV, they went through it with us in the newspaper, reading between the lines and going down the rabbit holes, They're different rabbit holes than what we have now. I mean, our rabbit holes are at the touch of our phone screens, but back then they're just reading between the lines. They're like, well, what we're being told, I don't think what we're being told is what actually happened. What actually happened,
Yeah.
And the thing I appreciate about both of you when I started to watch some of your podcasts is you're like, we need to have conversations about things, civil conversations about things without the inflammatory back and forth and canceling each other and throwing each other's opinions in the garbage because we don't agree in that moment on that day,
Yep.
And so I was looking forward to sharing. So
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. It's such a heartbreaking story. I put myself in, I guess in like the mom role when I was hearing everything. I think because you guys as children were the age of my children now. And so I really think about just the family dynamic and what your mom was going through in that moment as well. I literally cannot imagine what that morning was like for her. And
yeah,
I don't know. You can't mentally go there. But I mean, you guys lived it. So like what happened from there on? How did she cope with that? How did your dad cope with that? How did you cope with that morning?
It was bad. I mean, I don't think the tears stopped for me anyway. If they did, it was only just to get basic things taken care of as far, as our needs to survive. And none of us were eating really. We weren't really talking much to each other. It was more just like this collective black cloud of grief just settled. My mom, she was always thinking ahead, and I think it started to rain. It either started raining the day Sam died or the next morning, I can't remember, but she had said, let's get some buckets out and just catch rainwater off the roof because she knew we weren't going to be going down to the spring to get water because they had, sort of made it clear to us they were just, shooting. And we still at that point thought, and I look back on that, I'm like, this is just crazy. We thought that, but we were still hoping and believing someone was going to come and talk to us. Like someone was going to drive up the driveway and get on a bullhorn or try and communicate with us and say, some kind of this terrible accident happened. We still were thinking that we were still looking for leadership, I guess you could say, in that situation.
Yeah, like an olive branch.
Mm-hmm. Like somebody who's going to come say, okay, now how are we going to move forward from here?
Right.
My mom she was shattered. Sam, I mean, I'll say it to this day, I believe Sam was her favorite. And I don't say that in any kind of a negative way. She loved him so much. And it was probably, in fact, I know it was the absolute worst 24, 26 hours of her life. I know mid-afternoon, she just went upstairs to her bedroom and I can only imagine the grief she was going through. And then Dad joined her a little bit later. And for the two of them, I don't even know what that night was like for them, but it had to have just been horrendous. I mean, I spent the whole night awake just bawling my eyes out. And I couldn't sleep. I couldn't come to terms with the fact that he was gone. Like, I kept expecting him to come walking through the front door. And my mom was a strong woman of faith. Like, she believed the Bible. And, at one point she believed that, he'd come back. She was that strong and that hopeful, I think, in her relationship with the Lord, that she believed he would do that for her. And it's funny, recently, I grappled with that later on. I didn't have any faith for 10 years following. I was angry, thinking religion was part of the reason we had gotten in this mess, and I wanted nothing to do with God. And I grappled with that, thinking, well, here my mom had strong enough faith. She believed God was going to bring Sam back, and God didn't do that. So, if her faith could be that strong and he wouldn't do that for her, that was a good reason for me to be mad at him. But I just learned recently, I was talking with someone about that, and these are just, more things you can discuss all day long. But someone shared with me, it's because your brother didn't want to come back, and I was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. Like, when Jesus walked the earth, he raised people from the dead. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. And he's like, you know what? You're going to do that too. And you're going to do more than I did. And it's like, So if my mom had that kind of a faith, that he could come back, but he didn't. And I had never heard that theory before until recently. It's because your brother didn't want to come back. And I was like, you know what? I wonder if there's some truth to that. Like, he got to the other side and was like, this is way better than where I came from, because he had strong faith in the Lord. Mm-hmm. Out of our whole entire family, the two family members that had the most faith and the relationship with God were my little brother and my mom. The rest of us
needed more time.
Yeah. And there was a point where I was grappling. I had become a new Christian myself, and I was grappling with whether my mom and brother were in heaven, because their belief system, my parents' belief system, had gone from sort of basic mainstream Christianity to more of an Old Testament based religion during their journey up there, and more of the works and grace got left out of it. Like, Jesus on the cross got left out of it. I don't remember being taught that as a child. More of the Old Testament judgmental God, where you had to keep the laws and stuff like that. And so when I became a Christian, when Jesus saved me, and he saved me radically, I was grappling with that with my mom, and I was asking the Lord, I'm like, are they in heaven? Because their beliefs were just wrong, but I knew they had this strong relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't very long after I had been praying about that a reporter gave me a picture of my mom that was taken on surveillance, one of the surveillance cameras, and she's dressed in complete white. And I knew then that God had her, because I did the laundry, and we didn't wear white on the mountain because it was too hard to keep clean. And she's literally in a white robe, and she's got white shoes on. She didn't have white shoes, and she didn't have a white robe.
Wow. And
so when I saw that picture, I was like, wow, thank you, Lord. Like, it just gave me so much peace that I knew she was with him. But how else can you explain that picture? I can't explain it, and I did the laundry.
Yeah.
So I guess I got way off track there.
No, that's fine.
That's incredible. I've seen that picture. I know exactly what photo you're talking about.
Yeah.
I did wonder why she was wearing white. I was like, they live up there. I'm like, wow, she's brave.
And I believe that was either the day Sam passed or it was the morning she passed. I'm not sure which day that was, but it was one of those 2 days.
Wow.
And that picture came into my life like shortly after I had prayed to the Lord about whether or not they were with him. So yeah, pretty powerful.
Yeah. It's incredible. Well, now you know.
Yeah.
And that's...
Yeah, I do know now.
Yeah.
I think when you first, when I first got saved, I had so many questions about so many things, and I was hitting God with them right and left. I'm like, why'd this happen to me? Like, out of all the people in the world, why did I go through this? You know, I had tons of stuff for him. Just, why did you pick me for this? You know?
And
And
did you find clarity with that?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I know I still have questions about a lot of it, you know, but I know he never wastes a pain or a hurt. And I know things that are meant for evil, he means for good. And so we can go through things on this earth that are terrible, and he can turn them around for good if we allow him to. If we allow him to heal us of our pain and heal us of our hurts and use those things, then your story helps others and it becomes a full circle thing. And it's really beautiful because it's also part of your healing. Because when they come back and tell you what your story did for me, and you hear that, and it just is so humbling and it's such a blessing because you know what you went through was not for nothing. You know that the family member that you missed out on so many years with, it wasn't for nothing. Like, it's still, there's good coming from it. And when you go through it and you don't have that, and you're just in the pain, and you're just in the mud, and the messiness, in the hole, in the despair, and you haven't come out to that other side yet, it's a hard place to be. Like, it is such a hard place to be. And I was there for 10 years. You know, in a 30-year span, you think, oh, well, 10 years isn't that long. It was a long time for me. It felt like an eternity. So, yeah.
It's an unimaginable thing that you went through at such a young age, and so you didn't witness your brother. So did they go and get him? Is that how that?
Yes. So my mom immediately, you know, when she found out, she's like, we're going to get Sam. We're not leaving him down there. I think as any mom would be, you know. And so she was, you know, she was such a feminine, just beautiful woman. She wore skirts all the time, and that was part of the Old Testament thing as well, you know, women not wearing men's clothing. But she put her jeans on, and she's like, we're going to get Sam. And so I stayed back, and it was Kevin and my dad and my mom went back down to the Y, as it's called and known, and it was down past our property. It wasn't really on our land, but it was down past our property. And I could hear them crying and screaming, and I knew, you know, for sure that Sam, you know, was gone at that point. So this happened shortly after Dad and Kevin came back, that Mom was like, we're going to get him. And I was just sort of hanging out on the rock that overlooked our driveway, and I saw them carrying him between the two of them, and that was all I could see. Like, I had to turn away. I couldn't, like, that was my last, sort of my last view of my brother. And I couldn't see him after that. I didn't want it to be my last memory. Mom and Dad brought him up to our guest shed, and they placed him in our guest shed, and they cleaned his body and wrapped him in a sheet. And, you know, they offered for me, you know, to go see him. And I was like, I can't go see him, because when my dad came out from cleaning him, like, he had Sam's blood all over his jeans, and he told us what happened, and he showed us his rifle and how the bullet that had gone through the back of his elbow had chipped the buttstock of his rifle. And I was like, I can't see him. I can't go there. I don't want seeing him, you know, gone to be my very last memory of him. So, that was a really hard day. And then the next day, I think I'm pretty sure that was when Mom was, you know, putting buckets out to collect water and stuff. And other than hearing, you know, things moving into the valley, that next day was fairly quiet as well until the dogs alarmed. And so my dad, before I could realize what had happened, Kevin and my dad had headed out the door to see what the dogs were after. And at that point, I think something in me, just a switch flipped, and I was all about like protecting my family. Like I was like, I don't want anything to happen to them, so I want to be there, because I wasn't there when my brother died. And I think, and I still struggle with that to this day, but not being there to help him when I was his big sister, to protect him, and just knowing he died alone without me is just a very, very hard thing to this day that I still struggle with. But from that point forward, like a switch flipped and I became the protector. And so when I realized Dad had left the house, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go with him. I got to follow him. And so he and Kevin had sort of gotten ahead of me, and they followed the dog out to the rock, because the rock overlooked our driveway and you could hear, anyone coming in from that vantage point. And we were all just sort of sitting there, waiting to see if someone was going to try and make contact with us, or sort of, come up the driveway. And we didn't hear anything. Everything was quiet. And so we're just kind of standing there listening. And if you've ever been in the mountains, and you can just kind of hear how quiet everything is. Where we lived, you could hear things in the valley. You could hear the train. So just standing out there and listening, and we didn't hear anything. And so my dad had decided he was going to go check on Sam, is what he said. And he cut off to my right to head towards the little guest house. And again, I was probably caught up in my own grief and my thoughts, because he got away from me before I could be on him. And when I realized he took off, I was like, oh crap, I need to stay with him, because like I said, this protective thing just came on me, and I probably still have it to this day, to be honest. But I started following him, and he got around the side corner of the shed where the door was, where I couldn't see him. And so I was coming up around the shed, and I came around the same corner where the door was, and I heard a gunshot. And I got around the corner, and Dad he'd already gone around the opposite corner. So when I got there, he wasn't there. But then I went around the next corner to the other side of the shed, and he was standing there crouched, and he was like, I've been hit. And at that point, I was like, and then my mom, she opened the door to our cabin, and the door opened out towards the mountain. And we're sitting like, Dad and I are right here around the shed, and the door opened to our cabin, and Mom's over here. And to get where Mom was, we had to go out and around this big rock outcropping and tree. And so we had a long sort of ways to go across the yard to get around into the cabin. And so I put my hand on my dad's back, and I'm like, we need to get in the house. And my mom had popped the door open, and she's like, what happened? And my dad's like, I've been shot. And she started just, you bastard. She started cussing. Like she was letting him have it. So I put my hand on my dad's back, and I'm like, we have to get in the house. We have to go now. And what was going through my head was, if you're going to start shooting at my family and you want to kill my dad, you're going to have to kill a kid first. And literally that's what was going through my head. But I was blocking him. Like I was blocking him, and my back was to the sniper. And I was like, all right, this is what's going to happen. You're going to kill me first. And I started pushing him towards the house. So we're running, and we go around the tree and the rock outcropping, and the door's here, and mom's behind the door, and the door had a window in it, just like a paned sort of glass window, and her curtains were in it, but they were tied back. And she was standing there because our door had a bungee cord on it, so it would close on its own. And she was standing there blocking the door open, holding my baby sister. And so my dad and I are running, and I didn't know it this time, but Kevin had fallen in behind us, and he was running for the house as well. I didn't know he was behind us. I was just focused on getting Dad in the house. And we all got to the door at the same time. And it's when I just heard in my left ear just this massive boom. And I just felt like just fragments of something just hit my cheek. And then Mom, she just crumpled. She just dropped right beside me. And then Kevin, who was behind me, he fell in through the doorway in front of me. And my dad had made it through the door into the house. And so it was like everything just around me just fell. And I was left standing there beside the door. And when Mom fell, she fell and she was cradling my little sister and she was holding the door open still. And I was stunned. And I found out later, I think it was Bo Greitz that told me that the bullet carries the sound, which is why it was such a loud, like it left my ear just ringing. And what had happened is when the sniper shot through the window in the door, he shot my mom, and then that same bullet hit Kevin in his arm, went through his arm, and shrapnel went into his chest, and he just fell right through the doorway. And it's a miracle to this day that I'm still here. I don't understand, other than God's grace, why that bullet didn't take me out and took Kevin out instead. It makes no sense to me from our positioning, because I was right next to her. Mm-hmm. And that stuff I felt hit my face, that was part of her face. And I didn't even realize it until later. But for all of that, just in one, it felt like just a split second of, and I still have trouble with this ear. If I hear a loud sort of, if it's a firework that I don't know is coming, or it's a backfire from a car, or it just still gets me to this day. But thank God I have, I've been able to work through a lot of that. If I know it's coming, it's not as bad. If I don't know it's coming, then it's pretty bad. But I'm able to work through it. I don't freak out or anything. But it was, the next few minutes after that they were just very, very difficult. I knew what had happened, and I didn't know how bad, as far as how badly Kevin was wounded. I didn't know how bad Dad was wounded. I guess at some point, I don't even remember, I made my own way into the house. And then I became focused on taking care of Kevin. And then Dad said, I've got to get Mama in the house. He picked up my baby sister, and she had like blood and stuff all over her face. And he was cleaning her off. And he's like, I've got to get the door shut. And so he pulled Mom into the house and he bolted the door. And that door stayed bolted until Bo Greitz, got us out. But Kevin, we thought Kevin was just going to die, fairly quickly from his wounds. There was just a massive puddle of blood in the kitchen, and he was laying on his back on the floor, and I had gone to get towels and things to try and help any way I could. I didn't know how I was going to help, but he was laying there, and he was in bad shape. There was a lot there. I mean, there was just so much going on because, my dad was trying to deal with my, getting my mom in, and Kevin's on the floor and he's like moaning in so much pain, and there's blood everywhere. And I think I kicked into sort of go mode on how I can help, Kevin. And he started to say he was cold and that, he was thirsty, and, that happens when someone's life is leaving them. And so I got him a blanket and tried to get him something to drink. And then my dad said, we need a blanket to cover Mom. And I went and got a blanket to do that. And I just remember thinking, Dad covered her face with the blanket. And I'm just like, I think mercifully, he had pulled her hair like over her face because the bullet had taken half of her face, and he pulled her hair over, I think. So when I went to help him cover her, I just kept thinking, you don't cover people's faces. Like, the things that go through your mind when you're in the middle of something like that are just kind of random. But I just remember thinking, you don't cover people's faces. You just don't. It hadn't like hit me like she's gone. Like, she is gone. And I'm covering her face with a blanket, Yeah, it was bad. And so Kevin laid there for a while, and we didn't know, if he was going to make it. And I think after a little while, when he hadn't passed, was when we helped get him moved into the living room, into the recliner. And then I sort of helped Dad take over taking care of him for the next 11 days, just trying to keep his wounds clean and, get him water or what he needed. But we had some really bad days and nights, just really bad days and nights. They all ran together.
And so you guys were locked inside the cabin, feeling as if we stick our head outside the window, we're next. This went on for 11 days. So during that time, you must have had to have stepped up as role of mom for your two little sisters.
Yeah. My middle sister sort of took over caring for my baby sister in a lot of ways. And I took on the role of, getting food from the kitchen. And because moving about in the cabin, for me personally, it felt like they were just shooting now. And we weren't supposed to make it out. Like, they wanted us dead. And so for me personally, it was about staying down and away from windows. And Dad, don't light a cigarette because they're going to see it in the dark, like those kind of things. And I would crawl, into the kitchen, staying low away from the windows, and go into the pantry and try to pull food out for my baby sister. And then I also was helping to try and take care of Kevin. And then at one point I was like, Dad, you were shot too. We need to look at your wound. And he's like, I forgot all about it, because the adrenaline, and his was a pretty clean entry and exit, thankfully. So I don't think it connected with any bone or anything. It was just a flesh wound, but we still had to treat that. It went in through his shoulder and out through his armpit. Kevin's, on the other hand, it was bad. His muscle on the outside of his arm was about the size of a soup can lid, and it was just poking out through the skin, like just the muscle and all of that. And then he had the entry into his chest. And so it was terribly painful for him. There was one point, I don't think he wanted to continue, and he wanted my dad basically to end his life. And it was the middle of the night, and I heard him asking my dad to end his life. And there was this long silence, and I was just bawling, and I was like, no, I was like, you can't do this. Like, and my dad finally, after this long silence, he's like, buddy, he's just like, you're gonna have to do it yourself if you're gonna do it. He's like, I can't do this. You'll have to do it yourself, And I'm so grateful that we made it through that horrible moment, and it ended, with Kevin still being with us. Thank God.
Yeah. So there must have been so much hopelessness in that moment, in those days, in those 11 days. How did you get out? How did this end for your family?
Well, I think for me personally, I had made peace with the fact that I wasn't getting out, and I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I wasn't going to let anyone else hurt my family if at all possible. And so there was that, there was just that resolve. I was like, okay, this is it. They don't want us to make it out. And there was a point when we heard them crawling around underneath our house, and my dad screamed out at them, because we didn't know at this point, what sort of, if anyone even knew what was happening to us, or if it was all a big secret to the world. And so he's like, these guys under our house may be different from the ones that, were doing the shooting. I'm going to tell them what happened. And so he screamed through the floor, and he's like, my son is dead. Vicky's dead. I'm wounded. Kevin's wounded. The girls are fine. Like, he was communicating through the floor. And our cabin was just a plywood cabin. It was nothing, you could hear people talking, through the walls and the floor and stuff. And we never got a reply or a response. I don't know why that was, but he was still trying to sort of create a dialogue, I guess you would say. And he was so broken in that. So after a while, obviously our family in Iowa got involved. They had been contacted, and I know my aunt had they brought my aunt up in an armored personnel carrier to try and communicate with my dad at one point, but she couldn't hear Dad, and he couldn't really hear her in order to get anything across. They had sent a robot up onto our front porch at one point, and they wanted us to pick up a telephone off the robot. The robot, my dad looked out, didn't want my dad to look out the window because I was afraid his head was going to get shot off, but he looked out the window at the robot, and I believe they might have even told Paul Harvey about picking up the phone off the robot, because Paul Harvey, he did kind of a plea for my dad to surrender. And my dad looked at the robot, and there was a shotgun on the robot aimed at the telephone. And so that was definitely not going to happen. There's no way I would have let my dad open that door and try and take that phone from a robot with a shotgun aimed at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was terrified. I was literally terrified that any of us stuck our heads out, they were going to get blown off. And they just kept confirming that in my mind, being 16, it was just, you keep proving to me that you can't be trusted.
Right.
And then they had psychologists on bullhorns talking to my mom, who was dead on the floor, and just, Vicky, we're having pancakes this morning. Don't you and the kids want to come out and have pancakes? Just open the door, come have breakfast with us and things like that. So there was a lot of stuff going on that made me not want to come out of the cabin at all, and not trust them, not come out of the cabin. When my aunt was up there and she wasn't really clearly able to communicate, I saw it as something that was on purpose. I didn't think they wanted her to communicate with us.
It was like a carrot.
Yeah. Or like maybe they're, pretending they're doing the right thing in front of my family, but in reality, they're not really allowing it to happen the way it should. I don't know. There were all kinds of things going through my head. I didn't trust them at all. But eventually, Bo Greitz was contacted, and Bo Greitz became part of the scene. And despite, lots of rumors that my dad and Bo Greitz had served together or whatever, that wasn't true. But my dad knew who Bo Greitz was, and he respected him, and he knew Bo Greitz was running for president. And he respected, the fact that he had served and was the most decorated Green Beret, and that Rambo movies had been based off of his rescues and things like that. So he was someone that my dad was willing to talk to.
He trusted him.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think he trusted him more than I trusted him. And I don't necessarily think it wasn't Bo that I trusted. It was the whole situation. I was afraid because Bo, he wasn't afraid. Bo got out of the armored personnel carrier and came up to the house, and he wanted to talk through the walls because he couldn't hear my dad. He's like, I can't hear him in this thing. I'm getting out, like whatever. Like he was the kind of guy we needed in the beginning to just come up to the house and sit down and have a conversation, right? He got out of the carrier and he came up to the side of the house, and my dad said the first thing was, Bo, Vicky's dead. And Bo was just like, oh my God, because none of them down there knew that. They had found Sam in the shed and they had taken him out, and that's when the family got notified and everything. But everyone down, at the roadblock supporting us, which I'm so grateful for the supporters at the roadblock, just everyday people, everyday North Idaho people. They went down there and made their presence known. And whether you agreed with their belief system or whatever, they were a presence holding another presence accountable. And that, I believe, was a huge part of why we got out of there alive, was just their vigilance in holding a line for us and saying this isn't right, And I'm so thankful for them. And I want to say thank you to them right now. If there's any of them listening that follow your show, like, thank you for being there. Like that was huge. But Bo showed up, and I think at some point Bo offered my dad legal counsel through Jerry. And I think Bo might have committed Jerry before even Jerry committed Jerry. But Dad had started to make some plans with Bo to surrender. And so Bo came up the next day, and Bo got real pushy at one point, and that made me not trust him. And he was like, you guys got to leave like right now, like today. And he had come up and he had carried my mom out, and he had promised not to let her body touch the ground and all of those sorts of things. And I really, was thankful to him for that, to carry her out and everything. But I still wasn't ready to trust him fully. And so when he got pushy with us, I got very distrustful. And I just told Dad, I'm like, Dad, I don't know. Like, I'm still scared. I'm like, what's to stop them from, shooting Bo? I thought, and then blaming it on us. All these things were going through my head. Like, I had zero trust for anybody. But Dad, he trusted him. And so when Dad finally put his foot down and was like, no, and they had taken Kevin. So Bo had gotten Kevin out earlier and gotten him medical treatment. So that was before we surrendered. Mm-hmm. Kevin really needed to get out of there and get to the hospital. But when Dad made up his mind, I just went along with him. So yeah, Bo ended up getting us out of the cabin.
And so what did that look like? Your dad just said, let's go, we're going?
Yeah, he said, you know what, I think we need to go. And it was the relationship that we sort of as kids had with our parents, is they did listen to us. It wasn't just all, you're the kid and I'm the parent, you do as I say. And I think they had a lot of my respect because of that. And so they treated us with respect, and we gave that back to them in turn because we felt heard. Mm-hmm. And so he would hear me, and if he wasn't sure himself, then he may let me sway him a little bit. But when he made the decision, I knew when he made the decision, and it was just, Dad made the decision, this is what we're doing, and there wasn't an argument. So
how did it feel?
Did you eventually feel a sense of relief with leaving the cabin, or were you still fearful even when making that initial contact with the law enforcement personnel that were on scene?
When we stepped out of the cabin, I fully expected to be shot at. Like, at that point, I wasn't feeling any relief. Like, walking away from the cabin, it was almost surreal. I felt like a walking dead person, basically, which was, oh, I'm still alive. Look at that, because I had expected not to be. And as we walked away from the cabin, I could see men in camouflage hiding sort of along the driveway and behind bushes and things like that. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, really? Are you kidding me? And so I didn't know if any moment, they wouldn't try and take me out. But I think I'd made peace with death at that point. And it was like, okay, this is what we're doing. And so it was a very surreal moment. I think I had a very hard time when they separated us from my dad.
And at what point did that happen?
I believe that happened down at the end of our driveway. They put us in one car and they put him in another. And I know they were getting him medical treatment at some point. They had strapped him to a stretcher because he had been shot too. And he hadn't eaten for 11 days. And, he had gotten very, very slim, from that. And so we were separated, very quickly after we left the cabin. And it was just myself and my sisters. And then when we got to the meadow and we saw the whole military scene, like you said, it looked just like out of a movie to me. And there were, guys with boom boxes and wearing shorts and playing ball and like having a good old time, like they were, on vacation or something. And to me, I'm just like, all of this for my little family? Like, really? This is insane. Like, what is this? Yeah. Like, wow. It was wow.
The entire scene, even in watching video clips, it's so surreal. Mm-hmm. And getting it from you here in person, it truly is mind-boggling, especially just being here in North Idaho and knowing that this is the setting for that all of this occurred in. It's I'm so just kind of taken aback by the fact that you were able to move on from this, and your story has become one of perseverance and strength. how did that happen? How did we go from you walking out of that cabin to you being the you that you are today?
Wow. A lot happened. I look back over my life, and there were many, many days, weeks, months, years I spent just surviving my own emotions. So I don't think it's really living, if that makes sense. You're just surviving everything in you that's coming at you, whether it's grief or anger or, sadness or just missing, a person. And I think I made a decision at some point that I was going to prove to the world that we weren't who the world thought we were, and do the best possible representation of my parents that I could. And that was all in my own strength, you could say. I look back and I also see God carrying me in a lot of ways. And before I even knew him, his grace was on me and he was keeping me and carrying me. But there were days I was literally just surviving my own emotions and post-traumatic stress. And I didn't have counselors that I talked to. I didn't have, there were no victims advocates at the time. I'd never had a victims advocate or anything like that. It was just, I felt like the whole world was against us. The whole world misunderstood me. I didn't even think a psychologist could understand where I was coming from. And so I had no really desire to talk to one. And how could you know what I've been through and think that you're going to help me? I mean, it was arrogant in some ways because I was a teenager and I'd just been through hell, and a hell that no one could say, hey, I've been there and done that. Let me speak into your life.
Right.
And so I had no confidence in. So I might have been asked, do you want to speak to someone? And being 16 and hard-headed and coming out of Old Testament religion and sort of, the apocalyptic mindset, and the things my parents were learning about the Bible, and then having it actually play out in front of me and losing half my family. And a lot of the things that my parents talked about did happen to me, and just in a different way. So I look back on and there were a lot of firsts for me too. So being a teenager who's very sheltered and sort of stuck on a mountain, homeschooled, one or two friends, didn't get to experience the world, didn't get to do things normal kids do. So there was this thing going on where I was curious about life, being that age and wanting to experience life, but dealing with this gigantic responsibility of the entire world, feeling like the entire world hated you for your belief system and hated your parents, and you deserved what you got, and wanting to prove them wrong and do really well in public school, which I was terrified of and absolutely hated and didn't fit in. And it was, I don't know, it was a lot. It was a lot, but there were little gifts along the way. Like if I wanted to go get my ears pierced, we ended up moving in with my aunt and uncle, and my aunt and uncle were very, very, they're very more on the liberal side of things, where my parents are very conservative. And so I know that at times they had no idea what to do with me. They were probably very frustrated with me at times, but as I was with them at times. But, if I wanted to go to the mall and get my ears pierced, they would take me to do something like that. And so there were these little breaks along the way of just experiencing life in between the grief and the pain and the wanting to prove everyone wrong. And so as a teenage girl, I'd go to the mall and get my ears pierced, or get my driver's license at 18, and learn how to drive. And I was sort of thrust into a world I had been being sheltered from. And because I had walked through the worst, I wasn't scared of that world. I wanted to experience that world. But there was a lot of just dark heaviness on me all the time. So, going to a movie or going, riding an escalator for the first time, riding an airplane for the first time, all these firsts in a way I think were somewhat therapeutic on top of just dealing with everything else. But it wasn't easy. It was very, very hard. It was very hard. And then being in the media, this would happen with the case, and then it would be all over the newspapers again. And yeah, it was rough.
So did you stay separated from your dad after that, or were you guys able to reconnect before he actually had to go to trial?
No, he got put in jail, and he sat in Ada County Jail for a while. We could go visit him in jail. I think we visited him a couple times, but we were separated from him. We first moved in with my grandparents in Iowa, and then it became too much for them. They were just, too far along in their retirement to be able to deal with us. And then my aunt and uncle stepped in, and we got put in public school from being homeschooled. And Dad was in jail in Idaho, and we were in Iowa with our extended family, who we didn't really know because we were so young when we left Iowa, and we knew our grandparents because our grandparents would come visit us in North Idaho once a year if they could, which that was a blessing because then they weren't total strangers.
Right.
But my aunt and uncle, I wasn't, super familiar with. But I'm very grateful for them taking us in, at a really busy time in their life too, because they were raising their own 2 girls, and they, my aunt worked full time, and my uncle had his own recording studio business. So they had a lot going on. But yeah, so I just determined, to prove to people, one person at a time, who my family was, and not who everyone thought they were based on what the news said or didn't say. And I made it through high school, and became, a young adult, and I was going to do things my way and do them different and do them right and do them better and live the American dream and build my house in Montana and, have all the things. And I quickly realized, on top of all my trauma and then a postpartum depression after having my son, on top of the regular PTSD that I had had, which no one talked about that stuff back when I had my child. Like, no one talked about PTSD. No one talked about postpartum depression. I didn't know what they were. I didn't even have a frame of reference for it. I was just like, life is really, really hard, and it sucks a lot of the time,
Yeah.
So I didn't understand triggers. I didn't understand any of that stuff that's just, common knowledge now. I just had to get through it. And sometimes I did well, and sometimes not so well. There were times I didn't want to keep living. There were times I realized that sometimes it's easier to die than to pick up and carry on and keep living. But I felt that taking my own life would have been a cowardly act. I'm not saying people who do are cowardly. I don't believe that at all. That was just for me personally. In that I didn't want to leave my son without a mother the way I had been left without a mother. Like, that would be the worst thing I could possibly do. So it was just not an option. But I hit rock bottom. I had achieved a lot of things, and I had achieved the things on my list. And, I remember my husband at the time he got really frustrated with me, and I was not happy. And he's like, write down what will make you happy. I think he was at his wit's end with me. And I didn't know. I had nothing to write. And that scared the ever living daylights out of me, because I had, built a house and had a child, and I had all these things that the world tells you will make you happy. And you should be fine. You should be healed. You should be okay, because look at, your outside looks great. And I was really good at putting on an I'm okay to the world, like when inside maybe I wasn't so okay. And one day I was having a really particularly hard time, and I was just like, I can't believe I'm in this spot again. And my son was like 2, and he was a very rambunctious 2-year-old. And I was like, what would my mom do? I mean, I think when you have a child, you look to your maternal, your mom, and you're like, okay, I have a baby. What did you do when you had a baby? But I didn't have that. I wasn't able to go to her and ask her, is this normal? Like, should I be feeling this way? Am I a terrible person because right now I don't want to be here and I'm a mom? Like, those conversations weren't being had. I had no frame of reference for that, and I didn't have her to talk to. And I was so used to sort of putting on this I'm okay to the world, because if you're not okay, you get judged. And I had been judged. and I had been canceled, and I had been through all of that. And so you get really used to just putting on this front that you're okay so that you're not judged, because you can't deal with that on top of everything else. You just can't. You're supposed to be, this happy, wonderful mother. You shouldn't have these feelings like it's too hard and, it's too much. And it had nothing to do with my love for my son.
No.
Nothing. Like, adored. He's the best thing. He's one of the biggest God gifts I've ever had in my life. And so there's a lot of guilt that goes with that too, as a new mom. But one hard day, and what would my mom do? And I knew she would go to her Bible. And so I pulled out her Bible, and I couldn't really read it. And so I went and got my Sunday school Bible out. And that's where the story goes full circle to when my parents left Iowa. But I know we've been at this probably a really long time. Are you guys okay? Do you
No,
need
it's
something
fine.
to
Unless you need a
drink
break. If you need a break or you need a drink or anything, please let us know. I'm gonna grab a water, but I'm great.
I didn't know how long of a episode you wanted
There
to
was
do. Or...
There's no
zero
rules.
time limitation, zero rules.
No.
Okay. I think I was sharing with you when I do an interview, it's like 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
I should have told you that ahead of time.
No, that's great. So when you wanted to turn to your mom and you couldn't, did that strum up like anger or
Depression. I struggled with a lot of depression. Just a lot of sadness, a lot of grief, just a lot of, unresolved.
Yeah.
I don't think I allowed myself ever to truly grieve. I think I kicked into protection mode. I kicked into step into your mom's shoes mode. I kicked into proving the world wrong mode.
But
Get your
then
water.
It's fine. It's fine. I want to be disruptive.
then I know you're opening all quiet. But then God gives you a son, which then it's kind of a full circle in a way, because not only do you get your friend back, but now you can completely understand the love that your mother had. There's something about a mom's love for their son, for their little boy. And so it definitely helps. You're saying, oh, he was probably my kid's favorite. It's funny because my son, who's 13 now, is always like, I'm mom's favorite. He was actually born on my birthday, but so he's like so there's always this joke, and the kids are always like, oh. And then Eli comes along, but the girls are like, no, we're not mom's favorite. But there's just something about a mother and her son. So, I mean, man, this sounds kind of weird, but I was just thinking about as you're telling the story, like, God has mercies in weird ways. And the fact that your mom joined your brother the very next day. Like, I don't know how she would have lived without him.
I don't either.
And so in a weird way, even though it's so hard for everyone left behind, for her heart, she got her son back.
I think the Lord had mercy on her. Yeah. And I don't think Sam could have lived and carried on the way I have been able to. He was so loyal and just so passionate and such a fierce little heart. I think he would have really struggled. I mean, I really struggled. Yeah. Both of them were very much alike and connected. Yeah. And out of our whole family, they had the closest relationship with the Lord. And looking back on that, I'm like, God knows what he's doing. We don't always see it, And I don't think she could have. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I know exactly where you're coming from with that. I've thought it myself.
Kind of went in my mom head. I know you as a mom of a son, I'm sure have already thought of that. You just wouldn't want to.
And I don't think she would have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask about your dad?
Yes.
I know you recently lost your father. My condolences.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Do you think that your dad felt a sense of peace with everything that happened? No.
No.
Harbored a lot of resentment, anger, frustration.
It ate him alive.
Really?
Yeah. it destroyed him. He never came back from it fully. In fact, that was a lot of my pain, was watching his pain. I think in a lot of ways, I felt his pain because I watched him suffer the loss. And I understood the loss because I was suffering it, but not on the level that he had, because it was his wife and his son, For me, seeing him be so misunderstood, and I had my moments with him, like my relationship with him was so complicated in so many ways. Just really loving him, wanting to protect him, being a daddy's girl. But him just having so much pain, he couldn't give back to me what I needed from, that father-daughter relationship. Which was okay. I'd never held that against him. And then there were times, especially after I became a Christian, that, he struggled with his faith. Genuinely, very deeply struggled for a long time. And he was angry with God, if there was a God. And then he was an atheist for a while. And then, he couldn't reconcile it. He just couldn't reconcile it. He was very strong too, and very hard-headed, and very opinionated and no filter. I think the no filter thing bothered me more than most people. Most people were like, "Oh, your dad's awesome," but there's times he would rattle off and I would just be like, "Oh my gosh, Dad." But he was authentically himself all the time. And if you liked it, great. If you didn't, oh well, and that's just who he was. And there were times I was like, "Dad, just use a little wisdom here, because it'll be much easier, for you, for me, like whatever." But it just wasn't who he was. And then when I became a Christian, I think he might have had some demons that were irritated by my light or whatever. But there were times that he would just go off, and I'd be like, "Dad, where did that even come from?" And it was hard because I lost my relationship with him. The day Sam died, he changed. He had, his part of him, he died too, and so the dad that I was used to left. And I had felt that I lost both parents, from the beginning, because it really did. It robbed him, that it wasn't there anymore. I did a lot of things with him. I did book signings with him. He leaned on me a lot in a lot of areas. I stepped in to try and help him in ways that I shouldn't have had to, but I wanted to, because, I really, daddy's girls, they love their dads, they just, and that's what I was. But there's a lot of things I disagreed with him on, and a lot of things I was so angry at him about, and he would do something, I considered stupid, and I'd be like, "Dad, what are you doing? I'm trying to protect you from yourself." I don't know. Daddy-daughter relationships can be complicated.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, they're complex at times.
They are. They definitely are. I kind of go through that now with our own teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can be, but I think that's amazing that you were there and you didn't harbor any resentment. You just knew that you needed to be there, and you didn't require, not that you didn't want or need it, but you didn't require that be reciprocated. And I think that's a really beautiful, selfless, just unconditional love that you had for your family.
It was very hard because he carried so much guilt over what happened, but I didn't see it as being his fault. A lot of people wanted to throw guilt his way, and I think he owned and carried that. And I think he blamed himself. If I would have just done this, hindsight's 20/20. If I would have just done that, if I wouldn't have done this, or I wouldn't have done that, I think he struggled with that, and he could never receive from me. So all of the love and the care and the things I was trying to do, he couldn't receive because he carried that. And so the more I poured out trying to help him, the less he could take in. And so that became But then when he needed something, a lot of times he would come to me and be like, I need this from you, which is also very complicated because if you won't receive what I want to freely give and then you come to me for something, that's difficult,
Right.
you know? So, yeah.
But there's trust in that too. Like he knew he could.
Right.
And so that's a kind of a compliment in its own way
Yeah.
that he knew he could come to you no matter what.
Yeah, which I probably didn't see that because he would come to me when he would get himself, you know, in a pickle or something. And I'd be like, well, what'd you do that for? You know? Yeah. Or people would come to him and they'd want to attach themselves to him and do something. And I could see it was not a wise decision. And I'd be like, Dad, no, this is not. He didn't have that like he couldn't discern properly people's intentions.
Right.
And I was really good at reading people and discerning what they were after because I had watched it from the time I was a little, you know, okay, you welcome these people into your life, but maybe their intentions are bad,
Right.
you know, so
Yeah.
yeah. So he would be, you know, all in, you know, with certain people and he'd be like, oh, I want you to come meet so-and-so or whatever. And I could see they were using him for their own gain. And I would be like, really?
Yeah.
So in the aftermath of all this, can I also ask about that? Because there are a lot of people who will reference the Ruby Ridge incident. I believe Timothy McVeigh with the Oklahoma City
Oh my
bombing. Is that
gosh.
correct? And then just kind of like the modern day militia movement that has kind of latched on to the events that you and your family had to endure as a beacon of, I don't know how to label it, but can I just ask what your thoughts or opinions are on all of that, if you have any at all?
Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? This has been going on for 30 years.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have very, very good intentions with it. And then maybe they see something in their lives that isn't right and they can draw a comparison and they're like, hey, you know, this is not, you know, a good thing. And then you have the ones that want to use it for their own gain. Somebody sent me an example of that the other day. They're actually using, you know, my dad and, you know, the Ruby Ridge thing to sell products online and stuff like that. And that's been going on for years. And it would really frustrate me and make me angry in the past. And I would just be like, this is so wrong. And, you know, how do you stop this or whatever? And then I just got to a point where I'm like, life is too short for me to constantly worry about what everyone else is thinking or doing or saying or using, you know? So I could spend all day long, every day, you know, searching the internet and finding people that are using it wrong and speak into that and literally ruin my own life because a lot of times just Ruby Ridge for me in my own life is like touching a hot skillet barehanded. It would bite me.
Yeah.
Like I've run from it at times. I have buried it. I have put it away. I have not wanted to talk about it. I want to live my own life. I want to do my own thing. I want to be joyful and happy and be about creative, fun things.
Yeah.
And then this always comes back. It finds me. It finds me over and over and over again. And you mentioned Timothy McVeigh. And when that happened, I remember I was in a thrift store when I heard about the Oklahoma City bombing, and they mentioned us as his motivation. And I fell apart. I fell apart in the store. I was like, this can't be. Like, you can't go bomb a bunch of people and kill little kids and use my name for that. This is so wrong. And so that then lit a fire of, okay, I need to get out there and say that. Like, I have to tell people, please do not do acts of revenge that hurt other people in my name. I don't want that. I have lived through that, and it is hell. It is hell on earth. I don't want that for anybody. Revenge is not worth it. It is not worth that pain. It is not worth it. And all it does is cause more pain. It's not going to fix it. It's not going to bring them back. You know, if we can have discussions and prevent something like that from happening again, if we can make decisions and, you know, better decisions, which I'm grateful that there are better decisions being made. I've been told, you know, it's been used as a training tool of what not to do in law enforcement. That's awesome. But please do not do acts of violence that hurt and kill other people and use that, because that's not who I am. That is not the life God has given me. That is not anything that I want to be a part of. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. He's the one that can handle that. I don't believe we were meant to handle stuff like that, So, yeah, trying to just become an adult and live my own life and raise a child and not live in the heaviness of Ruby Ridge. And then it just keeps keep coming back and finding me.
Yeah.
And finding me, and people will find you. And if they want to use it, and they want to use you or whatever, or they're just genuinely curious or whatever. I mean, it's just always found me. And so it's been a wrestling for me. I would throw it away and it would come back, and I would throw it away and it would come back. And so I've had to reconcile it with the Lord a lot. And there's times I still pull back. Like this podcast is I haven't done a lot in the past few years. One of the last documentaries I did, documentaries are a tricky thing for me because they don't let you in on the editing process.
Right.
And they can promise you that you can tell your full story and all these things, and they'll let you tell your full story, but what ends up on the cutting room floor is what ends up on the floor.
Right.
And usually it's the most important part to me, which is the hope part and the freedom part and the, hey, I went through hell, but Jesus did this, and now I'm here, and what can we learn from it?
Mm-hmm.
And so they tell I went through hell, and then maybe a couple seconds of this, and then it's like, put it away.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't want to tell this over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. It's sad, and it's horrible, and it's horrendous, but God didn't leave me there.
Right.
And I don't want to leave you there
Mm-hmm.
because that's not fair. That's leaving you hopeless.
Yeah.
And it's leaving you sad and depressed and angry and disillusioned and all of these other things we can get when we just pick up our phone. Like, I don't want to leave us there.
Yeah. We literally went back and forth on, like, how do we even talk to Sara about this? Because we wanted the story out there, because I was talking to my sister actually last night, and then she was like, you have any podcast guests coming? And so I was like, yeah, I have Sarah Weaver coming. And she's like, why does that name sound familiar? And I was like, she's a survivor of Ruby Ridge. And she's like, I don't remember that story. And so I thought, we might have so many viewers that don't remember the story or are too young to have lived that.
Yeah.
Because it was 30 years ago.
Yes.
So we were like, I do not want to have Sara retell this, because she has retold, like you have retold it over and over again on different documentaries. Mm-hmm. And like so much of us wanted to just be like, go watch the documentary. This is Sara now, but people aren't going to do that. So we needed the background in order to understand the amazing just transition in your life. So when did that part start for you?
And you don't have to apologize for any of that, because I know that I know that part has to be told. Like, and I have no problem with that. Like, you have to understand the depth of the valley before you can understand the beauty of the mountaintop, right?
Right.
And I knew, that you guys were willing to tell the whole story and not just part of the story. So I had no fear coming into that, with this podcast. But just that's been my experience, in the past.
Yeah.
And so, going through all of the depression and all of that stuff, and then having a rambunctious 2-year-old and still struggling with that, just depression, just that deep depression. And then picking up my mom's Bible and really not being able to read her Bible and not having a relationship with God at all. A few months before I had this just really hard day, my childhood friend had come to visit me.
Sorry. Yeah,
you're fine.
absolutely. You're good.
Huckleberry has to go potty.
Oh, gotcha. Do you need to use the restroom, honey?
Yeah, but
Oh,
playing woods out here.
I was going to say you could just
well-
knock on the door. or
Are you okay with him using?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
That's how we keep the
standard
barrier
practice
away.
around here.
Okay.
We tell the kids like pick different spots and the bear won't come.
Sorry, that was Sarah's husband walking by, just so everybody is
He was
understanding.
pottying my doggy. Maybe we'll bring Huckleberry on camera
Yeah.
so they
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah,
That's fine,
he's been kind of clattering around. He's so cute. I keep getting distracted by him.
He's just this little old soul that God gave me, and he knows, like, helicopters can still bother me, and he knows when a helicopter comes, and he just comes and comforts me. And
Wow.
he's been on so many book signings and interviews were very hard in the beginning, and he would just sit in my lap. And so he's my little service dog.
Yeah.
So I have a legit letter for him, and all of that. But yeah, maybe we'll introduce him because he's
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's
bring him
pretty
on
special.
up. Seriously.
Yeah, he's part of the story.
So my best friend from when I was a child, up in Idaho, Maria, had come to visit me, and we'd stayed in contact. She was living in California. We both had young children, and she came to visit me one day, and we were arguing. We weren't arguing. I was trying to argue with her on some point of religion that I had heard from my dad. I didn't even have my own opinion about it. It was something I'd heard from him, and she had said something, and I was like, oh, well, what about this? Just trying to be all, I didn't really have an opinion. I was just throwing something out there. And she looked me square in the eye, and she said, Sarah, I know Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And that was all she said. She just dropped it. And I was like speechless. And I just was like, because Jesus was not a name we used in our household. My parents used Yahweh and Yeshua, and Jesus was not a part of the Old Testament, religion I had been taught. So I was just like, okay, well, that ended that conversation. Next, what's for lunch?
Yeah.
So, and it made me kind of just shut up, and I was uncomfortable with it. Well, then a couple months later, and I was back to struggling, and I got my little Sunday school Bible out. And when my parents were attending that church in Iowa, this is so interesting to me, I attended Sunday school, and they would give you a piece of candy if you memorized a Bible verse. And I was very competitive. Like, I wanted that candy. Plus, I love candy. That helped. But when I grabbed my Bible, because I just sort of followed the rules and the laws to make my parents happy. Like, I didn't have my own religion. I didn't buy into the passion that they had for God. I was just kind of trying to stay out of trouble and off the radar. And, and I had since been mad at God. If there was a God, I was mad at him. But when Maria said that, I was like, oh man, she was convinced, and her opinion meant a lot to me. Mm-hmm. She had been my friend through thick and thin, and she just loved on me, and she didn't try to change me or talk me down. I was not a very good friend because I was so depressed and wallowing, and she was there, so I respected her opinion. But at 7 years old in Iowa, in that little Sunday school, I memorized John 3:16. And I think it's always worth quoting. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. And when I got my Bible out, I had no idea where to open up or where to turn. And I opened up to John 3:16 because I remembered that specific verse. That was the only one. And I went there. And when I read it, and then I read John 3:17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but so that through him the world might be saved. I felt the weight of the world just completely come off. It was so real. I felt like I could breathe again. That Bible verse, the first one, dealt with death. Death was the greatest enemy. It had been my enemy. I hated it. I hated death. It robbed me. And in John 3:16, death was dealt with, and then the condemnation was dealt with. Feeling condemned and feeling like I'm not worthy or good enough or whatever. Jesus didn't come to condemn you. He came to save you. And I knew in that moment that I had met him for the first time. And I was radically saved in that moment.
Wow.
That moment for me was more real and more powerful than all of Ruby Ridge had been because of the freedom that I experienced in that moment. And I was hooked from that point. It was like, whom the sun sets free is free indeed. And in that moment, I was so free. I had so much to learn. I mean, hey, honey, did you put it back in the car? Okay. Are you doing okay? Yeah. Okay. You're good. Are you guys doing good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think it's beautiful what you said, and you serve as a great example of that because of your strength, resilience. It shows, you live it.
Yeah.
Yeah, some days are better than others, but yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah, there's no perfection in faith or life or anything that we
Right.
have going on down here. It's just the fact that you can find any level of forgiveness or peace, it just speaks volumes.
Yeah. And to me, it speaks volumes about our Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it was an intense moment that changed the course of my life, for sure. And you're right about the perfection, and that's something that I've struggled, with in trying to prove everyone wrong and all of these things. And if you make everything look good on the outside and you have all these things the world tells you will make you happy, everything's going to be great. Well. No,
Yes.
we're all messes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Some days more mess than others, but like you said, there is no perfection in that journey, but there's beauty in it.
Yeah.
And you can find that. And I think that's powerful. So
I think your story is it's a story of hope through the worst circumstance. If you can find hope and peace and love and happiness, anybody can. And that makes you such a beacon of hope for so many people.
Aw.
That
means a lot. I hope people find that listening to this, because it makes it worth it to do it.
Yeah.
It makes it worth it to relive it again. And so that's my prayer when I come into these interviews, is that, the Lord would speak just to that person. He leaves the 99 for the one.
Yeah.
And even if it's just one, it's worth it, because I was one, and look at what he's done. Like it's amazing to me. He constantly amazes me.
Yeah.
I had a lot to learn, though. I'm still learning. I still have a lot to learning all the time. But, I ended up walking through a divorce as a Christian. I didn't understand forgiving as much as I understood I had been forgiven in the beginning, right? And there's two different roads to walk there. One, there's accepting forgiveness for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have a difficult time with that. I think it's more difficult when you're on the pain giving side than the pain receiving side, because it's easier to receive forgiveness if you haven't been the one doing the thing, And so when I received his forgiveness and I got all of that freedom, and he dealt with death, like that was one of the major things for me. Like death was not the end. He dealt with it. He defeated it. He conquered it. Because that had been the enemy to me. That was the thing. And he dealt with that. And I had received his forgiveness. But then I ended up becoming, when you get, radically saved and you're one way and you're depressed all the time and you're sad all the time and you live a muted sort of life. And then all of a sudden Jesus steps in and you become a new creation. Everything that brings that comes with that can make the people in your life very uncomfortable, because you change so drastically. And I was desperate to change. I knew if I didn't change, I wasn't going to make it. And so I started rapidly changing, and I was hungry for learning more, and then I discovered that there's a whole Christian family out there. I had no idea, and what comes with that. And then a church family. And then it's like, oh my gosh. And then, there's conferences and there's things to learn, and God starts changing things in you. And the people in my life were like, oh boy, what just happened here? And I don't blame them for that, because I did change. And so, that ended up leading me down, a path where just separated from the person I was with. And that's a whole other long story. But what the Lord taught me in that journey, as painful as it was, because for me, it was like another death. Like divorce can feel like another death. And coming out of Ruby Ridge, like I had been the victim. And people, they agreed with that. And they'll tell you all day long, oh, this never should have happened to you. They'll pat you on the back and say you have every right to be angry, every right to be, upset and bitter and all these things. Like, of course you do. Like, and they will put you up on that shelf and they'll help keep you there. And it's not healthy. It's not a good place to stay, but it's comfortable, because you have full support of everyone around you. But, going through the divorce, it was like going through another death. And then I was hurting people right and left, because you can't go through divorce and not hurt people. I didn't want to ever hurt people. Like having been so hurt myself, I never wanted to hurt anyone else. But in order for myself to survive, like this, I had to go through this, this thing. I had to change. And if they could either, come along or not, and that's kind of just how it was for me. It's not like that for everybody, but that's just how it was for me. And it was a not. And so, I give them credit that there was a try there, but it just didn't work out. And so I learned through that divorce, and still clinging onto Old Testament religion, I thought, if I never wanted to go through divorce, I never wanted a divorce. I was like, I was one of those people, I'm never getting a divorce. I look down on people that got divorces, like, and here I'm, walking through it, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So never say never, because as soon as you say never, it's almost like you get humbled for that never. And so that's a big lesson I've learned. But I learned that I became a perpetrator. And so, having been the victim all these years of pain being perpetrated on me, I became a perpetrator, and I ended up hurting people through my divorce. And I still was terrified God was just going to kick me out. Like he wouldn't want anything to do with me getting a divorce, and he really surprised me in that he was so tender. He held my hand through it. He walked me through it. He didn't condemn me. I did more condemning. There's no one harder on me than me. I did more condemning of myself. And I know God hates divorce, and I never would, encourage that as a Christian, as a way out or anything like that. But there's not the condemnation in it either. He hates divorce, but he doesn't hate people who get divorced. And I think we need to make that distinction.
Yeah.
He loves his children. He's going to help you through your mess, right? If you're a Christian and you get divorced, God's still there for you. You just have to give him that stuff, right? And let him heal you. So that's coming out of it. And that's where he taught me the importance of forgiveness and forgiving the perpetrator. Because I had received forgiveness, but I had not forgiven those who had perpetrated the pain against me. And when I got that, and I finally understood being a victim, I had experienced intense, terrible pain perpetrated on me by other people. And when you're the victim, you have someone to blame, right? You have somewhere to place that. All of that stuff can go over here on someone else. But when you are the one causing pain, you have no one to blame but yourself, if you're honest. If you're truly honest, you can still blame other people for why you did what you did. But at the end of the day, really, because you're making the choice. So, if you're honest, you have no one to blame but yourself. And when the Lord showed me that carrying that is worse than carrying the pain of being the victim, then I was like, whoa, I have to forgive. Not to mention all the Bible verses that say forgive to be forgiven. They're in Matthew and Mark, and I encourage you to look them up if you're struggling with forgiveness. Any of your listeners, look up Bible verses on forgiveness, because it's very clear in there, we are to forgive. And that was a whole new level of freedom for me. And what I learned is that forgiveness is not a feeling. At the end of the day, it's a choice. you choose to make it as often as you need to, as many times as it takes, pretty soon, it's not even an issue in your life anymore. If you just keep turning it over. And the feelings can come back and you can be angry and not want to let it go and all of that stuff. But if you make the choice to, all of that's keeping you in bondage to what the other person did to you anyway. It's not saying that what they did is okay. It's not condoning whatever it was that happened. It's not giving them a free pass. But it will set you free from what has been perpetrated on you. And I do think something happens in the spiritual realm too for them. Like, I don't know for sure, but I feel like once you release that and you let that go and you give it to God and you say, okay, I am choosing not to hold this grudge against this person, then I think not only can he work on you, but I think he also can work on them, you know? And, you know, I want to be really clear too. It's not about removing your boundaries in any shape or form. You know, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, should I go tell the person I forgave them? And I'm like, not necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an important distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. Not unless the Lord is leading you to, or he, you know, he sets up a way that you guys are talking, because there's a lot of people that you might choose to forgive that still think they never did anything wrong, you know, and then you're in a pickle, right? So use, you know, wisdom and discernment in that. But for me, it's just a personal choice between me and God that I make over and over and over again until it no longer has any hold on me. And so can reconciliation come after that? I think it can. Does it have to? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
You know?
But it gives you freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's amazing. Yeah. It kind of goes back to, if you can find hope, anyone can. If you can find forgiveness, anybody can.
Yeah.
Because like you said, no one's been through what you went through.
Well, and I think it's the Father's heart. And I think when we go after his heart, he helps us. He empowers us to do the hard thing the right way. And that's available to everyone. I'm not special in that. I just was so desperate. I needed his heart. Like, I had to go after his heart because that was my lifeline. And it's available to everyone. And that's just so amazing.
Yeah.
So
It is. So is that what inspired you to then want to tell your own story? So was the book written after your personal faith journey?
yes, this book, the Ruby Ridge to Freedom, the Sara Weaver story, that after the Lord walked me through, you know, this radical change and teaching me about forgiveness and changing my life and helping me, you know, find that hope again. And the depression went away. And I knew I had to tell that story because the old story didn't represent me anymore, not fully. And I felt like the Lord's story, it's his story, really. And I've seen him do just such amazing things with it. You know, it's not even mine to keep to myself, even though it's hard and I don't want to tell it sometimes and I don't want to put myself out there. It's not even my story anymore in a lot of ways. It's for someone else. And he can do that with anyone's pain. He can do that with anyone's story. You just have to be brave enough to surrender it to him and say, here's my loaves and fishes. And they look really humble and they look really sad. And it's all I got, but it's what I got. And you take it and you bless it and you multiply it and you do something with it. It's all I got and it ain't much and I can't do it on my own, but you take it. And then he feeds the 5,000.
Yeah.
And we just have to be brave enough to do that. And there's been times I haven't felt brave enough to do that, but I would just step out in faith and do it anyway. And he always met me there. And so I would just encourage anyone listening, you know, if you're getting that nudge and you're walking with him, you're going to be okay. He's got you.
Yeah.
Just be brave and take the step, not if someone else is pushing you or pressuring you or it's society or whatever, but if it's, you've got this thing, just you and the Lord, and he's like, I think you should, just step out and do that.
Yeah.
Personal relationship with him is just so key for my walk, is just hearing from him and that you want me to do this. So I can do stuff in my own strength and it doesn't turn out.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. So
I think it's kind of amazing that you're sitting here with us right now. I thought that you would just ignore us when we reached out. It was actually Jeremy's idea to speak to you, and now I understand why. That all of a sudden you popped into our heads, because I don't think it was an idea that popped into our heads on our own
oh wow.
knowledge. I think it was talk to Sara.
Wow.
And so I think that's really incredible, and I just realized that right now.
Yay.
Like, what a neat. I feel honored to be a vessel. So I just think that it's so strange. Like, even when my sister was like, oh, how do you guys come up with talking to Sara? I'm like, I don't know. And I didn't really think about it until you just said that now. And it's like, this makes sense now. Now I understand.
It does. It does make sense.
Yeah.
And I shared with you earlier, I had, so I have a bunch of friends in this area on my social media, and I had seen where you had done a grocery giveaway, and that's all I really knew about you guys. I saw that one video and I was like, that is just so cool. Like, these are cool people. Like, that was my first opinion of you.
Oh,
and then so I have some really close friends, and they have a YouTube channel called Unknown Chicken Bones. I'm going to give them a shout out. You can, if you can keep it in there.
We were on there.
Unknown Chicken
We were
Bones.
on their channel briefly.
We were.
Yeah. Unknown Chicken Bones. They told us about you like a few months ago. It was July. It was a month ago. Yeah, it was July 4th.
Yeah,
I
we
think.
met them on the 4th of July.
Yeah, and they came back from that, and they were telling us all about you, and they're like, oh, they have a YouTube channel, and they have all these followers, and, and so you were on my radar those 2 times.
Oh, funny.
And so when you contacted me, and there's just so many other things that are a connection for me. Where you live is where we caretook a ranch. I had never shown this area to my husband. I haven't been in this area since I was a kid. And so I really wanted to come back to this area and be able to show him. And then, our friends bringing you up, and then the giveaway that you did. Because when we would travel, my husband and I, and we would do book signings, we never wanted to charge anyone for the presentation. It was always, the gospel is free, but we would do food bank fundraisers. And so we preferred that the churches would say, bring a can of food to come and hear the presentation. And then, we'll donate all of it to the food bank at the end of, our presentation. And so that was just a little, when you guys were doing that, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Because that's kind of what our heart was as well. And so it just the Lord, just tapping me on the shoulder. And so I probably wouldn't have done this. I've had offers for podcasts in the past that I have turned down, multiple.
We were surprised you said yes. I'm like, I think she's going to come. And he's like, what, really?
No, I said it before. We're so grateful to you for agreeing to do this and telling your story once again. And it's kind of weird. She said that I had the idea, and I literally was by myself in our master bedroom thinking to myself, who do I want to talk to? Who would be a great podcast guest? And for whatever reason, you popped into my mind. I literally you were not in the forefront of my mind. I didn't watch anything on you. You popped into my brain, and I guess God just works in very mysterious ways with everything it is that you're now saying from your end of things. It's amazing how everything came together. But again, so grateful to you for agreeing to do this.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm grateful to you guys, and thank you for that testimony.
Yeah, it's amazing. You gave me chills telling me about the whole thing.
I know. I got it. Well,
cool.
yeah.
So you weren't creeping my social media?
No,
no, it was so random.
It might sound weird in retrospect, but literally didn't look into you at all. Hadn't watched anything with you for multiple years.
Yeah. We did most of our research after you agreed to come. I was like, shoot, we need to really understand Sara before she comes. I had only ever seen the 700 Club interview. I think I was just when my kids were little. When we lived back in Washington.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was very random that he was just like, how about Sara Weaver?
Yeah, I walked out of the bedroom and I told you, I said,
Yeah.
yeah, why don't
And
we
I'm
try
like,
this?
how do we find her? He's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. And
That's amazing.
So neat.
Yeah.
God is so cool. I
Yeah.
love the way he does that.
yeah, I think it just needed to be told. And so you have this beautiful book. You brought us a copy. Thank you so much, because I was just about to purchase it on Amazon and add it to our homeschool reading. And so this is perfect. How can other people find this book? And we can include a link also in the description.
I am so glad you asked that, because I usually forget to even, do the plug. I'm so terrible at the business side of my life. Like, you guys are I look at what you do and I'm like, man, they are so cool. They have it all together. I don't have a YouTube
we
channel. So the book actually, in this area, if you have people following you in this area, they can grab a copy at the Mountain Traders in Elmira.
Okay. Yeah.
They carry it.
Familiar.
Bonner Books, they have ordered from me in the past, so they may have some.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can go to my website, which is Ruby Ridge to Freedom, and it's TO, so it's all spelled out.
Okay.
Ruby Ridge to Freedom.com.
Okay. And yeah, we're going to have a link down below so people can just click it and go right there. I think your story deserves to be told. I think it can help so many people dealing with anything.
That's thank you. Thank you for that. I
Well,
mean,
thank you.
yeah.
We really appreciate you coming. And I know it's a travel to here and with your little fur babies and everything. So yeah, we just appreciate you guys so much.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's the feeling's mutual. I do want to ask my husband real quick. Is there anything I left out that is on your heart?
Well, it's all good.
You're good?
I'm laughing over here.
Okay. I just wanted to
It's
double
the way
check.
he works things, but we just have to be open and available.
Yeah.
We have to be open and available and being plugged in.
Okay.
Being plugged in. Holy
Yeah.
Spirit leads us and guides us. We just got to be plugged in.
Awesome.
Amen.
Get me preaching, so it's all good.
Well said, Mark.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you to both of you. Seriously. Thanks for coming out here. Thanks for chatting with us. And thanks for telling your story. Again, it's like kind of like Melissa said, so important. So glad. Hopefully there's a lot of new folks that are happening upon this and learning about it. And they delve further into it, pick up your book, and
Yeah.
maybe find a little God in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all dealing with our own Ruby Ridges at some point, so
John 3:16.
yeah, John
3:16.
3:16.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Anything else from you?
No.
All right. Thank you guys.
God bless you guys.
Thank you.